of Schools That Can. It's a pleasure to welcome you to our first forum session for 2024 entitled Life Launch, a New Approach to Learning for Life. One of our country's leading innovative school leaders, Matt Wunder, will be moderating this extraordinary panel of thinkers. Matt's the founder and CEO of the Vinci Schools in Los Angeles. His vision of Life Launch is the latest innovation among many that he's incubated at Da Vinci over the years. It's a direction that further pushes the envelope as we seek new learning approaches aligned to our changing times. Matt, thank you, and thank you, panelists all, for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Michael. Really appreciate this opportunity to spend some time with three thought leaders, three people I have great respect for, who are ed reformers, who are pushing the system to do better for kids. Life Launch is actually a name coined by a great man named Frank Baxter. When we originally thinking of a working title, Career Launch, he goes, Matt, it's really more holistic than that. It's really about launching kids into reliably stable lives. Let's call it Life Launch. And so it is. Michelle will be telling you a little bit more about Life Launch as an initiative, as a bet we're making. It stands on the shoulders of really Joel Vargas's work at Jobs for the Future, based on the research from Big Blur. But I think for our conversations, I think we want to start back about what is the purpose of school and how do you launch young adults into good, purposeful lives? And so we have these three great humans and educators before us, and they're going to talk about launching students, launching young adults from their expertise and their vantage points. So Joel Vargas is a national thought leader around connecting what Michael Druckmann would term connecting education to employment. And he's with Jobs for the Future. Yusuf Ahmad is works has a startup, a nonprofit called Playlab, and formerly an MIT researcher, as well as part of the brains and brawn behind Teach for America's Reinvention Lab. And Michelle Rainey is an architect for many of the programs and schools here at Da Vinci Schools, and our Chief Learning Officer. So to the three of you, we'd like to ask, to the extent to which you're comfortable, talk about your own why, your journey to doing what you're doing, and maybe talk a little bit about the fire in your belly. So Michelle, if I may, I'll start with you.
Sure, happy to be here. Thank you. For me, my why comes down to this 7-year-old version of myself who felt very disjointed within educational settings. And I was diagnosed with processing disorders and dyslexia when I was young, and having an IEP in a school system that was fairly competitive created a lot of shame in my entire educational journey. And it really wasn't until I landed at Da Vinci Schools and there were these open dialogues about the gifts that we all have and an acknowledgement that we all have gaps and that there isn't shame in that I really started to grow and become vulnerable enough to grow as a learner. So my why is to create school systems that take the shame out of learning differences and all of our gifts and gaps, and create spaces where that can be talked about and used to advantages and not used to hold people back.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Yusuf, same question to you. What's your why? Why do you do this work?
Thanks, Matt, and thanks for sharing, Michelle. That was very inspiring. Um, for me, I think my fire got lit when I was in university. So I did my undergrad at Columbia, and I was part of a program, if you know the Posse Foundation and Posse Scholars, that was similar to it, that did a lot of youth and identity development work. That was very similar to Posse. And for me, that transformed me. Like I thought about learning as very academic or as career oriented, being a first generation immigrant. And it showed me that learning is much more than that. It's about finding your identity, finding your voice, finding your power to do things in the world with other people. And so for me, my why is really helping people find their power. And specifically, I think I'm really interested. Most people don't realize that they can create and that they think they need to consume things that other people have created. And I think that, consumption is great. I love Netflix. But I think it's also really powerful when each person has that feeling of creation. And so a lot of my work is oriented around creating tools, software that empowers more people to create and to bring their ideas to life.
Thank you so much, Yusuf. Joel, do you mind batting cleanup on this question?
Yeah, I don't know. Those are really inspiring stories. I know it's not a competition, so we're all personal, right? Like it's like my life launch program was not called such, but I stumbled upon it in a good way in middle school, and it changed my life. I'm convinced I would have stumbled on the way to college and career had it not been for that program, which really stuck with me through my high school and college years, actually. I was really, because of that experience and because it opened my eyes to the inequitable education system that we have in this country, I was determined that my why would be to eliminate those stumbling blocks for others and to create, programs that people didn't have to stumble upon, because they would be just something that would exist at scale that young people would find themselves into that would help launch their lives. So I don't know. I would say my why also comes out of a deep dissatisfaction still, even within my work over the years at JFF, even though our work is really about scale, which is why I did come to JFF and why I've stayed for so long. Things aren't moving fast enough, and we have to transform the systems at a much greater rate than we're seeing now. So I'm really excited to be here because I know Matt, you, Schools That Can, Michelle, Yusuf, you're helping to lay out a vision of what that transformation can look like. So I am not losing faith. I'm hoping that we can together, kind of put a huge dent into these systems and create education systems that are more equitable.
Thank you, Joel. But to be more precise and accurate, like you and your colleagues at JFF actually provided the inspiration and design principles for what we're making a bet on Life Launch as an initiative. We're going through a feasibility study now to see if it's actually possible. So we're going to ask you to spend some time giving us a primer on the big blur. I'm going to read the title of it, and then you're going to tell us all about it, if you would, please. The Big Blur, an argument for erasing the boundaries between high school, college, and careers, and creating one new system that works for everyone. So maybe you can walk us through that, and then Yusuf and Michelle can talk about the barriers that have shown up in your research. So tell us about the Big Blur, please.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, Matt. I'll start by saying there's no big blur yet. There's no big blur. I think there are antecedents to the big blur, and I think there are next generation efforts like Life Launch that are going to, continue to blur until we reach a state of blurvana, as we kind of joke around internally. And blurvana would be like really a set, like systems in education that would naturally connect older adolescents / young adults just as a natural course of their education to post-secondary credentials and degrees that have value in the labor market, to professional networks that can help them to make sure that they're staying on a good course towards a career, towards a good first job that they can get, you know, after a couple of years of post-secondary, but also have the opportunity to keep up going in their education if they choose. Our systems are antithetical to that right now. So right now we have grades 9 through 12 that are compulsory. And then we have asked young people, you know, we sort of say, exhort them that to succeed, you have to go to college, right? And you have to go and get your BA. And so like young people are sort of like, okay, that's what I've been told, that's what I'm going to do. And then furthermore, good luck after graduation, because that's all high schools are held accountable for, really, at the end of the day, maybe some college readiness indicators. But really, our experience through initiatives like early college high schools, which combine an associate's degree with high school education, and students do phenomenally well, especially those who are from low-income backgrounds. There's a rise of dual enrollment activity. That's not the same as early college, but it's kind of the core building block of early colleges, where students can get started early on doing some college experience while they're in high school. Those have phenomenal results when they're designed well. So we sort of said, in some respects, not to mention like good CTE programs and career academies, evidence around that. What the Big Blur sort of was an experiment in was to sort of say, those are really patches. Those are really Band-Aids on systems that try to reconcile a compulsory system with an elective system that's sort of like sink or swim when you get to college. It's no wonder why so many sink, as we're not supporting them. And we said, what if we welded this in a different way, using those evidence-based approaches and sort of taking them to the hilt logically? That's one way to think about the Big Blur. So let's say actually a very critical period in someone's career development is when they're ages 16 through 20. That's a key set of launch years, okay? One could argue now until 25, but we won't go there. Let's say 16 through 20. And let's make post-secondary education, the completion of a degree and or credential that has labor market value, an outcome of that system. So that would be the new high school diploma, if you will, as a post-secondary credential with value in the labor market. Let's co-design that with employers in regions, you know, so that their demands for skilled workers are being met. And let's do that so then students wouldn't have to pay. They would have work-based learning experiences integrated into their curriculum, so that they're getting early career experience as well as early post-secondary, early college experience, if you will. So that's the vision. And what would it mean to combine? Like, it's bigger than just a model, although I think we need models to show people the way, and it's a good lens to sort of say grades 11 through 14. Let's think in those terms, right? But really the Big Blur is about what are the governance systems, the accountability, the finance, the way we finance such a system. What would it take for professionals in those learning environments, staff, teachers, forget professors, forget high school instructor? What would a set of instructional core look like that would be well suited to teach, you know, and provide teaching and learning experiences for 16 to 20-year-olds? So that's really it. That's the whole enchilada. I think I covered all the ground there. It's audacious, you know, but I would say we're starting to see some semblance of activity, which makes me think that we can break through some of these and build some new systems around innovative models like the ones you're trying to create.
Thank you so much, Joel. We'll talk a little bit later about the hacks and workarounds to a system that doesn't currently support the Big Blur. A quick story. About a decade ago, Michael Druckmann invited a group of us to actually West Point. And I believe a prompt was, what's the purpose of higher education? And I was sitting at a table with two people from different walks of life. One gentleman that just sold his company for $100 million plus, who was there as a philanthropist, and then a single mother from Pittsburgh who had 2 children. And the philanthropist said, I just want my kid to find himself, to enjoy the college experience and figure out his purpose in life. And the mother from Pittsburgh was like, I just want my baby to have a great job. And so I share that to say the system works probably okay for the privileged, but I believe all of you really come from a space of what does economic mobility really look like, and how does the system better serve particularly those with the largest opportunity gaps. So Michelle, maybe we can go to you. Maybe you could name, we don't have 4 hours to talk about all the barriers and challenges that are out there, but maybe you could highlight some, and then Yusuf, from your vantage point, share some of them that you're seeing in your world, in your space. Michelle?
Sure. One of my favorite and most kind of inspirational TED Talks is Miss Adici's The Danger of a Single Story. And I think about it in a lot of different contexts, but I think that the educational community has embraced this narrative, this single story college for all, with positive intentions decades ago, that has really evolved or devolved into this dangerous single narrative of how you reach economic mobility. And it's told a lot of people to go to college and get a degree, sometimes any degree, acquire debt that we know doesn't pay off for, the 90% of low-income students who don't finish. And so I really envision a world where, without shame, people can evaluate themselves, their passions, their superpowers, their resources, and make paths forward that are networked, that are clear in what the resources are, how to use their agency, where there are this cognitive reserve of skills that people have to make those careful choices, where it's safe to take risks because it's an ecosystem. And I just believe that through collaborative efforts like this, we can change some of those stories for kids and create different and better pathways. There are universities out there that are making it safer for kids to choose college and dual enrollment and do it safely at a younger age. We partner with Southern New Hampshire and ASU for those reasons in one of our high school programs. So that's a little bit about my thoughts on that, Matt.
Thanks, Michelle. What say you, Yusuf?
I
Very
like
you see.
I don't know if I agree with your initial take, which is that might work for rich kids. I don't think it works for anyone all that well right now. I'm thinking back almost a decade ago, there's this book, Excellent Sheep, talking about how students at elite universities are like excellent sheep, right? They're kind of following incentives to, towards getting whatever job seems prestigious or high status. But a lot of folks are not really figuring out their purpose. And the other thing that Michelle said that I think is important is they might have more of a safety net in terms of taking risks, but a lot of them don't take real risks. And so I think that's the other thing that just I just ponder about sometimes. I'm like, right? Even folks who can financially afford to take the risks often don't. I think that has a lot to do with our culture. And I think there's a lot of discussion about K-12 and high school and bringing dual enrollment into high school. But I think that higher ed is fundamentally broken. As much as we want to talk about post-secondary credentials, if you look at the actual learning and design of those courses, even ones that are competency-based, they're not really student-centered. They don't really, leave space for students to find their voice, figure out their purpose. And so as we think about the Blurvana that Joel is trying to help us work toward. Like I guess like the fundamental question I'd ask is like, what are the kinds of things that a young person needs? Relationships, experiences, and then how might we build pathways and systems that enable that? And that's not an easy answer. Like I think that this kind of change happens in the scale of decades, not in the scale of years. The other thing I'll just share is like, the analogy that, so there's this guy named Carl Wyman. He's a Nobel Prize winning physicist at Stanford. After winning the Nobel Prize in physics, he shifted all his research away from physics to STEM learning in higher education. And the reason he did that is he was just appalled at how teaching and learning was happening. Like, and he gave a talk at MIT a few years ago where he was like, lecturing is akin to bloodletting, the practice of like leeching people to cure them. That was common in medieval Europe. And that practice took, I think, about 80 years for Europeans to move away from, despite the fact that there was abundant evidence in their public health systems. I think now there's a lot of evidence that, for example, lecturing isn't effective, that the design of a lot of our higher education system is not effective. I think it's going to take time. And so the question is like, beyond time, like what are the kind of experiments that we can start running? And so definitely excited about Learn Launch, but I'm also kind of wondering, what's the next version of SNHU or ASU, right? That's the other kind of part that I think also needs to get built.
Thank you. So Michelle, let's go back to you for a moment to go a little bit deeper. I don't think anyone is on the screen is advocating for no college. And in fact, we see this national trend towards dual enrollment. You talk about sort of the three legs of the dual enrollment stool. Can you share those and talk why dual enrollment often is, it sounds great in theory and really, really hard as school operators to pull off with fidelity and quality?
Sure. So our newest high school at Vinci Schools launched with the intention of students earning their AA and or bachelor's degree within their time here at Vinci. And we have had some success and examples of that system working, but our college partnerships have been many and morphing. And what we've learned in the process is that I believe there are kind of three main ingredients that have to be there for it to be successful for kids and for the K-12 schools that are partnering for dual enrollment outcomes. And those are affordability, transferability, and reliability. That the K-12 ecosystem has to be able to absorb the tuition of that partnership, whether it is a tuition or whether it's from a state-sponsored dual enrollment partnership or agreement. There has to be transferability of the courses so that students early on can have all the options that they want in front of them available to them at the end of that pathway. And kids don't know when they're 14, 15, 16 necessarily what they want to be doing in a few years or 5 years and 10 years. So we want to keep all those avenues open for them. And then reliability, in order for K-12 schools, for high schools to embed dual enrollment into their master schedules, and I think most importantly, make it equitable opportunities for all students. So not a couple of classes with 20, 30 seats for the students who are, high achieving and can afford the time and even the transportation to have that experience for every student in, let's say, a biology class to take biology as both a high school class and a college class relies on a certain amount of availability of that coursework. And so if any one of those three things isn't there, it starts to fall apart and the barriers really emerge. And I think that's how a lot of the inequities and who accesses dual enrollment starts to happen. Even students having agency over whether that course is transcripted is really important. And so we really are intentional about what grade levels kids have certain experiences in, and when they can safely have those experiences with certain dual enrollment partnerships.
Thanks, Michelle. So I think we're making the argument that the system doesn't work well. My friend Yusuf, I thought, said it really well, that it really is not working well for anyone, but better for some than others. But if you started over, if you decided to move, if we moved to Mars and we created a new educational system, my argument would be you wouldn't create or recreate the system we have now. So what would success look like for launching young people into reliably stable lives, lives of meaning and purpose, and being able to live the lives they envision? What would success look like? So talk about the elements you might see in a school system that really didn't have to do these hacks and workarounds, but really started from scratch. What would it look like? What would you see? Yusuf, can we ping you first?
I was hoping to hear from Michelle with because y'all are kind of doing that. The only other, I guess, like I'll share two things. I think one is like humans, since humans have existed, like have had all kinds of rituals and rites for children becoming adults and becoming contributing members of society. And there's a lot of writing about that. But I think that's one thing that I'm like sitting with. The other thing I'm sitting with is if you bring that into today, this is like a bigger problem than education. Like it's connected to our civic institutions. It's connected to our geography of our cities, right? Like getting around New York with great public transportation is a lot easier than trying to move from like Watts or South Central LA to an internship opportunity in El Segundo, right? It's physically like, it's very difficult, right? And so I think whereas in New York, a kid living in Queens could go to Manhattan or Brooklyn, right? And so I think there are bigger problems that are outside of education that impact opportunity and mobility. And even in New York today, you talk to a lot of kids in the Bronx or East New York, they're not going to like tech startups in like Manhattan or downtown Brooklyn. So there is like still a lot of urban segregation, even if the infrastructure affords transportation. That being said, right to your question, Matt, I think if I were to think about this, it'd be like kind of, how might you start to integrate kids into real life in their teens? And then what are the kind of ways in which you scaffold both their connection to real communities of adult learning and adult practice, where they can see, it's almost like, imagine like a kid at a skate park, right? Imagine if you could like, you can hang out on the side, you can see people. I know like where you live in LA, Matt, like Venice Beach has some wonderful skate parks. But it's really cool to just see like the cultures of learning that can develop in contexts like that. The challenge is a lot of adult life and adult work is like cordoned off from most young people. You can't actually see what works. Look, and if you are working next to somebody, they're just smashing keys. Like, what does that mean? What is it like? What are they actually doing? And so I think there is a bit of like opening up the black box of like what adult work looks like. It's about connecting young people with communities. It's scaffolding their agency. And the example I'll share is Powderhouse Studios in Boston. I really like the work that they're doing. They're an XQ funded school. It started as an in-district experiment. Now it's out of the district in Somerville. The second one is this higher ed experiment called Station One, founded by Christine Ortiz, who used to lead graduate studies at MIT. She's a brilliant material scientist, but she's kind of rebuilding what she thinks the university would look like without classes. It's purely apprenticeship-based, research-based, with like a lot of like supplemental work in the afternoons and evenings where students reflect on identity and purpose and wayfinding. But I think those are two experiments that start to concretely get at connecting young people with real opportunities and then scaffolding both how they connect with those communities of practice, actually build real skills, and build their own agency for wayfinding and building their own life.
Thank you so much. So Joel, if you were a benevolent dictator, how would you create a system that best and better serves kids?
Well, first of all, I agree with everything Yusuf said, and I'm going to echo some of those things, and then I will do the best I can to, not as magic wand person, but probably more of a realist about like what it takes to get from where we are now to Blurvana or wherever it is. I do think I'm a firm believer just in exposure through, Yusuf, I think you were saying, scaffolded experiences that really stretch young people to do things with support beyond what they thought they could do themselves. That's just so important with the right support and the right exposure, and the skilled teaching and learning that comes with good instruction. And also just an appreciation for how you design, right, education experiences. I think those build a sense of self-efficacy in young people that's invaluable. It's a durable skill, as they say, right, throughout life. I am going to be maybe slightly controversial. I don't know. I actually think settings that encourage what Raj Chetty calls economic connectedness, which is knowing people who are not from your own background necessarily. Everybody has social capital, right? But it's really social capital across class, racial lines that is associated seemingly with mobility. We can talk about ways that plays out, but it's there. And I think we should design around that and design for it. Anything that helps to build economic stability, if not momentum and wealth building, like build up Birmingham in Alabama has, an early college design. And then also what they're doing is apprenticeship, pre-apprenticeship in the trades. And the students are able to build their equity as well, because they get a stake in the houses that they're building. That's pretty cool. So, these are all things like stability, momentum, some connection to the economy. That's what supports choices ultimately. Like it slays me when people just come back and say, well, we got to give them a choice. It's like people have very bounded views of what their choices are. So all the things that I talked about, I think are ways to expand that field realistically of choices. Sorry, last time, get off my soapbox here. How to get from here to there, I'd say short of the magic wand. So I'm cheating in answering your question, Matt. I think we're thinking more in terms of dual transformation. It's sort of a business term, right? And how you transform your business, but we're using it to see if we can do this in social systems. And how do you basically improve today while you're inventing tomorrow, right? So, how do you do that without doing harm? Right. So you're not just breaking stuff for the sake of breaking it and not being very constructive, if not destructive. Right. And I think strategies like dual enrollment, right, are kind of like those good Trojan horses, because Yusuf, for as imperfect as higher ed is, right, it does show evidence of helping young people like kind of get degrees and credentials, maybe as imperfect as those are. Right. It's generally on balance a good thing to be doing, certainly beats the counterintuitive. That said, I don't see it as ever being sufficient. I think we're missing an opportunity when, for example, you've got 50% of community colleges, some of them, being populated by high school students through dual enrollment. And yet the colleges are doing nothing different in their programming. I think that's a lost opportunity. That's an opportunity to reinvent what is happening in post-secondary in all aspects of that operation and teaching and learning, that we need to be calling out and saying, this is a moment to create something different.
Thank you so much. So Michelle, Joel set the stage for the big blur. Do you mind sharing some high-level design principles around Life Launch and how at the Vinci Schools portal, where hopefully some of our regional neighbors will want to work with us to create this big blur inspired school. So tell us a little bit more about Life Launch, please.
Yeah, and if I could preface it by kind of doubling down on some things that both Yusuf and Joel referenced, I remember doing some research several years ago and stumbled across something that just was like put in words, something I was grappling with for so long as a kind of school designer, which was that from birth till age 18, when students fail, when they stumble, it's always an adult's fault. It's their parents' fault. It's an educator's fault. And as soon as they hit 18, it's never an adult's fault. It's their fault. So it's their boss. It's it's not their boss's fault. It's not the professor's fault. It is their fault. And I think we need to really look at that cliff and figure out how to bridge that gap better. And knowing that, and the last time I looked at this number, it was something like 74% of college students today are non-traditional college students. They are not the full-time in school, that's my job students, but yet the majority of universities are built to serve that small fraction of students. And so how can we recreate that ecosystem? So that's some of the driving thinking around, I think, Da Vinci Schools and around the schools that I work directly with within Da Vinci Schools. But to answer your question a little bit more specifically, Matt, so Life Launch is an educational model that Da Vinci Schools is proposing. As Matt referenced, we're embarking on a feasibility study that will then hopefully land in this planning year and then a launch year in 26-27. It builds upon the good work of people like Yusuf and like Joel, and also our partnership with Portal Learning. And our students are currently exploring opportunities with Portal to really understand the demands and the opportunities within the workplace. We have students who are being mentored directly by CEOs of major companies, and it's transforming those students' lives and their self-perception of what's possible for them. So it's the idea that students age 16 to 22 can come into this learning ecosystem where schools are partnered with businesses and higher education providers to blend high school coursework with college, with career training, and moving away from just career exposure into true career training and apprenticeships and opportunities to understand that path in front of them. And it's really striving to eliminate the hurdles. And some of those hurdles are the unnecessary time commitment that we asked of students to just do more work to prove their mastery or their competency. And it's really focused on how to help all learners, but particularly marginalized learners, prepare for financial security by supporting them before they're off into the adult world unsupported, which is why that reach beyond age 18 into up to age 22, and we've had conversations about beyond 22. And Matt, I'm sure you can add so much more.
Thanks, Michelle. The only other point I would highlight is back to Yusuf's point is the financial model for higher ed, in my estimation, is completely broken. And so this would be a free AA bachelor career training program for young people, so they're not saddled with crippling debt. And it would give them an opportunity to earn while they learn. So instead of flipping burgers or delivering pizzas, they would be earning a wage to work themselves through school while they're concurrently getting a skill set that will launch them into these careers and be able to level up there. So would like to ask you, Yusuf, tell us about Playlab, the why of Playlab, the work, and if you could also include in your response, like, no one, I would assert, no one is looking to eliminate teachers, right? You're empowering teachers in your work. What does adult learning look like through your work at Playlab? So give us an intro and tell us where you're going.
Sure. Thanks for the question. So Playlab, we're a nonprofit technology company, so like Khan Academy or Scratch, and we enable educators of all kinds, teachers, superintendents, principals, out-of-school educators at makerspaces and nonprofits to create their own AI-powered tools and experiences, or to adapt tools from our global community. So what does that mean in practice? You can, use English, right, or any language. I was at a workshop yesterday, virtually being run in Brazil, where folks were building in Portuguese. But the point is, you can use natural language, like your own language, to instruct the AI to do things, right? And you can do a lot of different things. You can build tools that generate content and curriculum. You can build tools that can be assistants or coaches. You can build things that support authentic assessment. And I'll just share two examples. I think on the coaching side, Big Picture Learning High School in the Bronx, they built a Big Picture Learning advisor, a virtual advisor that helps students. So it's trained on Big Picture Learning's advisory framework. So the framework that real Big Picture Learning advisors use when they're thinking about their role and responsibilities. And so the AI has that information, and it also has their internship data from Emblaze, which is Big Picture Learning's internship database. And what it does is a student uses it on demand whenever they want to ask questions about internship opportunities that might connect to their interests. And what the AI coach does is it asks some questions, it scaffolds, connections between interests that might seem pretty thin. Like a student might be interested in animals and art, and it might help them find real opportunities that then might connect to career opportunities. Has that replaced Big Picture Learning advisors at Bronx Lab School? It hasn't, right? In fact, it deepens real world conversation. So an advisor can now talk to a young person who's used this tool, this virtual coach, and have a deeper conversation about their work, about their interests, about real opportunities, instead of spending time on the kind of technical, let's try to look through the database to find the right thing. And so that's one example of how AI is being used to deepen human relationships and support an advisor in doing some of the harder and more meaningful parts of the advisor work, while kind of offloading some of the more tedious pieces. I think the other example is around authentic assessment. We're starting to see more people use AI tools and build AI tools that support real world, performance-based assessment or project-based learning, which is really hard to do consistently, fairly, and to upskill educators to do. And so that's the second use case or example that I'd share. If I step back, I think our approach here is, to your question on professional learning, I think that I'm a big believer that adult learning should look like what we want learning to look like for anyone. It should be meaningful. It should be connected to your purpose, your why. There should be opportunities for practice, and often practice with other people. And there should be space for reflection. What's shifting for you? What are you noticing that this opportunity is opening up for you? And so the plug I'd give is, one of the reasons we incorporated as a nonprofit is we think that AI needs to be more open source and more transparent. But two, we think that really anyone can build. Right now that the programming language is English. And so the challenge is not actually the building part, it's actually coming up, what do you build? What do you want to make? And how do you work on problems that are worth solving? What I mean by that is, how do you work on things that don't reinforce the traditional school system that we're talking about moving away from? How do you do things that increase student agency, that increase teacher agency, that make learning more meaningful, relevant, and fun? And so I think for me, those are like the hard questions. And the other thing I'll add is, like, we're very early in this whole AI revolution and moment. A lot of us are talking about chatbots. The interfaces are going to move beyond chatbots before the end of this year, right? We're working on a creator tool that'll support teachers in building things well beyond chatbots. And so I think that's the thing that excites me is as you think about real use cases that advance the blurvana that we're all talking about. I love that word, Joel. I'm gonna have to, I'm gonna do my best to get that out there. And with new interfaces, like just what might that unlock?
Thank you. And Yusuf, having been in a few convenings and conferences with you, you didn't ask me to say this, nor did you pay me to say this, but you have more folks who are coming to you to ask you to support AI education in their schools and districts and organizations. Why do you see this popularity, or why do you think people are catching on so quickly to embracing AI in the face of some hesitancy around, AI and the unknown about it? Why are people coming to you so much?
So I think again, it's the tip of the iceberg. Like we haven't reached a lot of folks. That's the reality. And I think even this conversation, like this is not the conversation in most of our education system or education systems around the world. So just want to acknowledge that we're at the very beginning of a journey. I think the thing that you saw last week, so Matt and Michelle attended a workshop that our team facilitated. And I think the light bulb moment a lot of folks are having is that they can create. And I think the reason that's powerful is if we think about this era of the internet that we're leaving, right? Kind of this Web 2.0, the era of the social internet, it was characterized by consolidation. We had a few powerful actors, right? Large tech companies gobbling up data, gobbling up attention, and a lot of people feeling dependent and almost helpless on these big technology companies. As we enter the AI era, this new era of technology and the internet, there's a path where we remain dependent on a few big technology players, OpenAI, Google, Anthropic, Microsoft. There's another path where AI is much more democratic. It's open source, it's publicly audible and transparent, and most importantly, people are shaping how AI is being used in ways that reflect your values, your community's needs, and reflect more interesting ideas for what the future can hold. And I think that last piece is really powerful. Joel started talking about this, but I think it's hard for any of us to really predict where things are going to go. And I think what we need to be supporting is robust and diverse experimentation of folks trying to create this world of the big blur. Not one person's not going to solve it. They're going to be, I think, just supporting a diversity of people creating, and our role in that is helping people realize that creating is possible for a lot more people now. And it's not just possible, we need more people creating if we really want, AI adopted in education in ways that advance the kind of learning that we're talking about right now.
If I can add on to that, what I created with Playlab a few days ago, and again, in the K-12 ecosystem, where I'm really trying to figure out the best way to support our staff to better support students when these challenges emerge, and what does that look like within our MTSS system. And so I created essentially like an MTSS tier accountability coach. And I realized, one, I was able to make something, which I don't consider myself to be all that proficient in making things on a tech platform, and a little bit hesitant to take that risk. And I, within 20 minutes, was like, oh my gosh, I made that thing and it works. And I was able to take my knowledge and expertise and a fairly flat kind of computer screen and create a third person in the space where I could not just find resources and then create something myself, but I was able to use what I'm really good at, what the computer's really good at, and then what this third person, this bot, is able to do that creates, I don't know, a whole different energy and dynamic. And I felt really empowered by it. So thank you, Yusuf. And I think it creates a lot of, it breaks down some of the loneliness and the barriers that sometimes educators face, even in what should be a highly collaborative environment.
But I think that's like where, if we bring it back to this, the core of our conversation around like life launch and the big blur, I think like a lot of the core values that like we've all been talking about that should be applied there, I think also should be applied to how we're developing technology and how we're developing adults to not just use technology, but who to lead this movement of creating the big blur in our society.
Thank you. As I think the three of you know, any opportunity to talk about my kid, I just jump right into that. So my kid is a surfer. And so I want to ask you, Joel, I perceive that Jobs for a Future, your work, you are early into the water, and also in some ways the waves weren't coming, and but you have figured out how to catch the wave in just a beautiful spot for the right ride. And so can you tell us a little bit about sort of the next 0 to 12 months, what Jobs for a Future is working on, and then what is 13 to 60 months out look like for your work and for JFF's work?
I appreciate that, Matt, especially because I'm not a very good surfer. So I'll go with the organization surfboard any day out into the water. Thank you. We're over 40 years into this journey. I think, that's how old our nonprofit organization is, working nationally. I've been with the organization for about half of its life. It's always been about trying to transform our education and workforce systems so that they achieve economic advancement for all, and doing that by a lot of things we talked about today, designing solutions with system leaders, with philanthropy, with employers, that can improve economic mobility for people of all ages. And the other thing we do is try to influence policymakers in the conversation, kind of like forums like this do. So the other thing we increasingly do is invest in solutions that have a lot of promise to reach more people at scale. I think Yusuf has alluded to some of those out in the field. So then, and there are other ways we invest. So I guess to answer your question, we're still working on, Blurvana, of course. I mean, that's something you'll see us do, sort of saying kind of what I laid out today. Here's where we are now. Think about that differently, so that we can kind of use this moment as whatever metaphor you want to use. I love the Trojan horse, to be able to say, like, that's a good thing to walk in with, but also like make the most of the moment the door's open, right? And then we can really create something different. I know people are going to go have a headache because it's sort of like, didn't I already blur your mind this time? Like the Delphonic song, blow your mind. But I do think we're headed more toward, and we have to continue to sound this note, Yusuf, a more agile learning system that creates the agility that everybody in the systems, the learners, and I include the workers who are in those systems as the learners. So Michelle, really appreciated your addition to what Yusuf said, because that is the kind of upskilling that we're all going to need to be doing in our lifetimes now. So we're going to be using the blur. I mean, that's just one example, right? That's not to bake it, into, it's sort of an example of, we can think differently, folks, but we need more agile learning systems altogether, where their learning is acknowledged anytime, anywhere, validated, valued, creating professional networks for them across social lines, all that stuff. So that's what we'll be working on. That's 10 years out.
Thank you. So we only have a couple minutes left. I see the three of you as pragmatic optimists. So leave us with 30 seconds or less, something you're really optimistic about for kids, for young adults, for our future, for our educational system. Just one of those is fine.
I'll start.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'll start, Matt. That cliff I mentioned, I think that what's happened in the last 5 years in our country is that we now have words for and the right to talk about those inequities, those gaps, those ways that our systems haven't served everyone in ways that people, I think, knew but didn't want to know how to feel empowered to talk about. So I feel optimistic that just being able to name things makes it more possible to address them.
Happy to go. I think I'm really optimistic about the kinds of experiments we're seeing. Like Da Vinci is a great example. Like each high school is different. This new one, I'm really excited to see the work that Michelle Rainey and her team have been leading is incredible. But experiments are not just at the school level, they're at the policy and the discourse level. And Joel, like your work, right, really shaping discourse around what's possible, helping reframe the conversation, I think has been really important. And so I'm excited to see more of this concreteness, whether it's concreteness in how we're talking about this or concreteness in folks building examples of what this future could hold. And I'm excited for more people to do this work as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. I can name innovations and Life Launch is one of the more exciting ones to be sure. And you're starting to talk with each other, right? Like STERM Collaboration Campus, Cherry Creek Innovation Campus in Colorado. These are sort of visions of like how you take kind of early career pathways, early college ideas and take it to the next level. I think yours is a prime example of that. And I do think it will take visions like that in order to change the policies. And I'll just remind myself, these bureaucracies we built around the archetypes that we have now, right? They were built for a past era, but they were built up, they're relatively new. So it's going to be harder, right? To undo them, to redo them. But like, I just think with folks like you, we're going to create a vision where it becomes imperative where we have to, and we must we must recreate those systems. And we can do that. And sometimes it takes the good models to force those changes. That's how high school policy got built. It was around copycatting the high schools, and we didn't always have the bureaucracy around it that we do now.